Brett laughed, sliding the velvet ring box back into his tailored jacket. You honestly thought I would marry someone your size? You are a liability to my new image. Julia stood alone in the freezing Chicago rain, shattered. Then a bulletproof black Maybach pulled up, and the city's most feared Mafia boss opened the door. The crystal chandelier of Le Petit Cheval cast a cold, unforgiving light across the white linen tablecloth. Julia Conti sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, listening to the man she had loved for 4 years dismantle her entire world with the casual indifference of a corporate layoff. Brett Whitlock took a slow sip of his bourbon. He looked immaculate, his blonde hair perfectly swept back, his expensive suit hugging his lean frame. It was a suit Julia had bought for him, just like she had paid his rent while he studied for his financial exams, and just like she had quietly fixed his disastrous portfolio algorithms late at night so he would not get fired from his wealth management firm. It is just the reality of the situation, Julia, Brett said, his tone dripping with a condescending pity that made her stomach churn. I just made senior partner. I am moving into a different tax bracket, a different social circle. The firm hosts galas, retreats in the Hamptons, yacht parties. I need a wife who fits that aesthetic. I need someone who looks the part. Julia looked at him, her dark eyes steady even as her heart violently fractured against her ribs. She knew exactly what he meant. At 240 pounds, Julia did not fit the cookie-cutter mold of the stick-thin, socially ambitious wives of Brett's new colleagues. She was soft curves, thick thighs, and a quiet, unassuming brilliance. She preferred vintage cardigans and late nights analyzing forensic datasets over designer dresses and empty small talk. You are breaking off our engagement, Julia said, her voice surprisingly level. Because I am fat, Brett grimaced, looking around as if her bluntness embarrassed him. Do not use that word. It is about health. It is about presentation. I am sorry, Julia, but you have let yourself go, and I am ascending. We are just on different paths now. I need someone who elevates my status. He did not even have the decency to look her in the eye. He signaled the waiter, tossed a $50 bill onto the table to cover his drink, and stood up. I will have my assistant send for the rest of my things at the apartment tomorrow, Brett said, adjusting his cuffs. Take care of yourself, Julia. Maybe try that new gym downtown. It might do you some good. Without another word, Brett walked out of the restaurant, leaving her sitting alone at a table meant for two, surrounded by the hushed whispers and pitying glances of the other patrons. Julia did not cry. She refused to give the onlookers the satisfaction of a scene. She carefully picked up her purse, paid the remainder of the exorbitant bill with her own credit card, and walked out of the restaurant with her head held high. Her chest felt tight, a suffocating pressure building behind her ribs, but her dignity was a steel rod keeping her upright. The moment she pushed through the revolving glass doors, the harsh Chicago night hit her. A freezing, torrential rain was falling, slicking the pavement of the magnificent mile and blurring the neon lights of the city. She had forgotten her umbrella. Of course she had. She stood on the curb, the rain instantly soaking through her wool coat, plastering her dark hair to her cheeks. Now, the tears finally came. They mixed with the freezing rain, a silent, bitter release of 4 years of wasted sacrifice. She had given Brett everything. Her time, her money, her brilliant mind. She had built him from the ground up, and the moment he reached the top, he had kicked the ladder away. A deep rumble broke through the sound of the pouring rain. A massive, sleek black Maybach glided to a halt directly in front of her, the tires hissing against the wet asphalt. Two black SUVs immediately pulled up behind it, blocking the right lane of traffic. Horns began to blare from angry drivers, but they abruptly fell silent as four men in dark suits stepped out of the SUVs. There was something terrifyingly deliberate about the way they moved, their hands resting subtly inside their jackets. The rear window of the Maybach slowly lowered, revealing the shadowed interior. "Get in, Julia," a voice commanded. It was a low, resonant baritone that sent a sudden, involuntary shiver down her spine, a shiver that had nothing to do with the freezing rain. Julia peered into the darkness of the vehicle. Sitting in the back seat was a man who looked like he had been carved from marble and shadow. He had sharp, aristocratic features, piercing dark eyes that seemed to absorb the streetlights, and an aura of absolute, suffocating authority. She recognized him instantly. Anyone in the financial sector of Chicago knew who he was, even if they only spoke his name in terrified whispers. Stefano Sacco. He was the undisputed head of the Sacco Syndicate, a ruthless faction of the Cosa Nostra that controlled everything from the city's shipping ports to the deepest pockets of the political underground. He was a man known for his brutal efficiency, his cold demeanor, and a terrifying intellect that kept him 3 steps ahead of the FBI. Julia froze, her mind racing. Why would the most dangerous man in the Midwest be speaking to her? "I am not getting in a car with you," Julia said, her voice shaking slightly, though she stood her ground. Stefano leaned forward, the faint light catching the sharp line of his jaw and the expensive cut of his dark suit. He held out a heavy, monogrammed umbrella, pushing the door open from the inside. "You are freezing, and your ex-fiancé just left you to drown on the pavement," Stefano said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "I, however, have the heat running, a glass of vintage Barolo waiting, and a conversation we desperately need to have regarding the $3 million Brett Whitlock just tried to steal from me." Julia's breath caught in her throat. $3 million? "Get in the car, Tesoro," Stefano said softly, his eyes dropping to her rain-soaked form with an intensity that made her skin burn. "Before you catch your death. I cannot have my best accountant dying of pneumonia." Driven by a mixture of shock, freezing cold, and a burning curiosity, Julia stepped forward and slid into the cavernous, leather-scented interior of the Maybach. The moment the heavy door clicked shut, the chaotic noise of the Chicago storm vanished, replaced by the hushed, insulated hum of the luxury vehicle. The Maybach seamlessly pulled away from the curb, escorted by the 2 SUVs. Julia sat stiffly against the plush leather, her wet coat dripping onto the pristine floor mats. She felt massive and clumsy next to Stefano Sacco, acutely aware of her damp, clinging clothes and the way she took up space. She instinctively tried to shrink into herself, wrapping her arms around her waist. Stefano reached into a built-in compartment, retrieved a thick, heated cashmere blanket, and draped it over her shoulders. His knuckles briefly brushed against her collarbone, his touch surprisingly warm and shockingly gentle for a man reputed to have broken a rival's jaw with his bare hands. "Drink," he instructed, pressing a crystal tumbler of red wine into her trembling hands. "It will warm your blood." Julia took a small sip. The wine was impossibly rich, exploding with dark fruit and oak on her tongue. She took a deep breath, clutching the glass, and finally turned to look at the Mafia boss. "How do you know my name?" she asked, her analytical mind overriding her fear. "And what do you mean about Brett stealing from you? I am not your accountant. I work for a legitimate firm." "Legitimate is a very subjective word in this city," Stefano murmured. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, watching her over the rim of the crystal. "For the last 2 years, Brett Whitlock has been managing a series of shell corporations for my syndicate. We use his firm to funnel cash from our less visible enterprises into the legal market. Julia felt all the blood drain from her face. Brett was managing mob money. He had never told her. But then again, Brett rarely understood his own portfolios. He was a salesman, a face, a charismatic talker who relied entirely on Julia to balance the ledgers behind the scenes. Recently, Stefano continued, his voice hardening, my auditors noticed a discrepancy. Small at first, a few thousand here, a few thousand there, skimmed off the top and routed to offshore accounts. Brett got greedy. He thought because he was dealing with vast sums, we would not notice the missing fractions. By this morning, the total stood at exactly $3.2 million. Julia closed her eyes, a wave of nausea washing over her. Brett was a dead man. The realization hit her with absolute certainty. You do not steal from the Cosa Nostra and live to attend Hampton's yacht parties. But that is not why you are here, Stefano said, shifting closer. The heat of his body radiated against her side. Brett is a fool. A dead fool, soon enough. What fascinated me, Julia, was the code used to hide his theft. It was brilliant, elegant, a masterpiece of forensic obfuscation. Julia opened her eyes, staring at him in horror. My men spent 3 weeks trying to crack the algorithms hiding the money, Stefano said, a dark smile playing on his lips. When we finally broke through, we did a deep dive into Brett's servers, and we found that Brett did not write that code. He does not have the intellectual capacity to write a grocery list, let alone a dual encrypted ledger. You wrote it. I did not know whose money it was, Julia blurted out, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. I swear. Brett brought me his files late at night. He said his clients were demanding complex tax shelters, and he did not know how to structure them. I was just helping my fiancé. I had no idea I was helping him launder stolen syndicate funds. I know, Stefano said smoothly. His dark eyes roamed over her face, tracing the curve of her cheek, the fullness of her lips. I have had my people watching you for months, Julia. I know you wake up at 5 in the morning. I know you take your coffee black. I know you do all the heavy lifting at that firm, while lesser men take the credit. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a hypnotic, gravelly whisper. And I know that idiot you were engaged to made you feel like you were not enough, simply because you do not look like the starving plastic mannequins he wants to parade around. Julia gasped softly as Stefan reached out, his large, calloused hand gently cupping her jaw. His thumb stroked her damp cheek. He looked at you and saw a liability, Stefano murmured, his eyes blazing with a sudden possessive fire that made Julia's breath hitch. I look at you and see an empire. You have the most brilliant mind I have ever encountered, wrapped in a body that has kept me awake for 3 months straight. Julia's mind short-circuited. She had spent her entire adult life trying to make herself invisible, trying to compensate for her size by being the smartest, most useful person in the room. She was used to being the punchline, the reliable friend, the secret backbone of a handsome man's success. No man, let alone a terrifyingly powerful billionaire, had ever looked at her with such raw, unhidden hunger. What do you want from me? She whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the tires. Everything, Stefano answered simply. The Maybach turned off the main highway, passing through towering wrought iron gates that swung open automatically. They were driving up a long, winding driveway lined with ancient oak trees, leading to a massive stone estate overlooking Lake Michigan. Armed guards in dark raincoats patrolled the perimeter, holding automatic rifles with casual ease. "I am offering you a position," Stefano said, pulling his hand back, though his gaze never left hers. "You will work exclusively for me. You will restructure my entire financial network. I will pay you 10 times what your firm pays you, and you will have complete autonomy over my ledgers." "And if I say no?" Julia asked, her stubbornness flaring despite the terrifying surroundings. "Will you kill me because I know about the stolen money?" Stefano let out a low, dark chuckle. "Kill you? I would burn this city to the ground before I let a single scratch come to you, Julia. If you say no, I will drive you to your apartment, ensure you have a comfortable life, and you will never see me again." But we both know you are not going to say no. Why? Because you are tired of playing small for men who do not deserve you, Stefano said softly. Because you are meant for the shadows, where real power lies. And because I am the only man who truly sees you. The car glided to a halt in front of the grand entrance of the estate. One of the guards immediately rushed forward with a large umbrella, opening the door for them. Stefano stepped out into the rain and extended his hand to her. "Let me show you how a queen is treated, Julia." Julia looked at his outstretched hand. She thought of Brett, sitting in that restaurant, telling her she was a liability to his image. She thought of the cold, lonely life she had been living, starving for a scrap of genuine appreciation. Then she looked at Stefano Sacco, a man steeped in violence, who was looking at her like she was the only precious thing in the world. Taking a deep breath, Julia Conti placed her hand in the Mafia boss's, stepping out of the car and into the dangerous, intoxicating world of the Chicago outfit. The Sacco estate was a fortress disguised as a Gilded Age mansion, and within 48 hours, the expansive mahogany library had become Julia's undisputed domain. Stefano had spared no expense. 6 curved monitors formed a command center on the antique desk, wired into servers that operated completely off the grid. For the first time in her life, Julia was not hiding. She was not shrinking herself to fit into a tiny cubicle or apologizing for taking up space. Dressed in a luxurious, deep emerald silk robe that Stefano had specially ordered for her, she let her fingers fly across the mechanical keyboard. She was hunting. Brett Whitlock thought he was a genius, but his methodology was sloppy. He had used a basic staggered transfer protocol, bouncing the stolen $3.2 million through a series of shell companies in the Cayman Islands and Cyprus before attempting to park it in a blind trust in Delaware. It took Julia less than 2 days to dismantle his digital labyrinth. She did not just find the money. She froze it. Every single account Brett had access to, including his personal checking, his heavily leveraged investment portfolios, and his secret offshore reserves, was now locked behind a 2-factor encryption wall that only she controlled. A heavy crystal tumbler of water was set gently beside her hand. Julia paused, turning the swivel chair. Stefano leaned against the edge of the mahogany desk. He had shed his suit jacket, wearing only a tailored black dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle and faint, sprawling tattoos that spoke of a violent past. He looked at her not with the cold calculation he reserved for his lieutenants, but with a mesmerizing, consuming heat. "You have been staring at those screens for 6 hours, Tesoro," Stefano said, his voice a low rumble. "You need to eat." He gestured to a silver tray resting on the side table, laden with roasted lamb, garlic potatoes, and a rich balsamic reduction. Julia felt a familiar spike of anxiety. For 4 years, eating in front of Brett had been a psychological minefield. Brett would scrutinize her plate, make passive-aggressive comments about carbohydrates, and sigh heavily if she asked for a second helping. I am not that hungry, Julia lied, looking down at her lap. Stefano moved closer. He reached out, placing 2 large, warm hands on her shoulders, gently massaging the tight muscles at the base of her neck. "Do not ever lie to me, Julia," he murmured, though there was no anger in his tone, only a fierce, protective demand. "And do not ever starve yourself in my house. You are a queen, and queens do not survive on air. You have a brilliant, beautiful body that requires fuel, and I plan on worshipping every single inch of it. Eat." The utter sincerity in his eyes shattered the last of Julia's defenses. The deep-seated shame she had carried for years began to dissolve under the weight of his undeniable obsession. She reached for the plate, and as she ate, Stefano watched her with an expression of pure reverence, as if witnessing a miracle. "The money is secured," Julia said quietly, setting her fork down. "I rerouted the 3.2 million back into your primary holding accounts. I also took the liberty of auditing the rest of your syndicate's ledgers. Your previous accountant was bleeding you dry on international tariffs. I restructured the shipping routes through a subsidiary in Nova Scotia. You will save approximately 14% on operational costs this quarter." Stefano stared at her. The silence in the room stretched, thick and heavy. Then the ruthless head of the Chicago outfit threw his head back and laughed, a deep, resonant sound of pure delight that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. 14%, Stefano repeated, shaking his head. "I bring you here to recover stolen change, and you casually reorganize my entire international shipping syndicate before dinner. You are a terrifying creature, Julia Conti." "I just like numbers," she replied, a genuine smile finally breaking across her face. "They do not lie. They do not cheat." "No, they do not," Stefano agreed, his expression sobered, turning dark and predatory as he looked at the monitors. "Speaking of cheats, what is the status of our mutual problem?" "Brett is panicking," Julia said, pulling up a secondary screen. "Since I locked him out, he has tried to access his bank accounts 47 times. His credit cards are declining. His firm is undoubtedly investigating his sudden lack of liquidity. He is a ghost in the financial system." "Let him sweat," Stefano commanded. "He deserves to feel the walls closing in. But he will not stay hidden for long. Desperate men do stupid things, and Brett Whitlock is the stupidest man I have ever had the displeasure of employing." Stefano's prediction was accurate. Over the next 3 days, Julia's old burner phone, which Stefano had kept active and traced, lit up with hundreds of frantic messages. Brett went from demanding she answer his calls, to begging for her help, to outright threatening her. He had realized the syndicate was onto him, and he believed Julia was the only one who could manipulate the codes to set the money free, so he could run. He did not realize that Julia was no longer his stepping stone. She was the architect of his demise. The Oak Street boutique was closed to the public. Stefano had rented out the entire high-end store for the afternoon, so Julia could have a private fitting. For the past week, tailors had been working around the clock, crafting custom pieces that celebrated her curves rather than hiding them. Julia stood on the plush, circular pedestal in front of a massive 3-way mirror. She was wearing a stunning, tailored crimson trench coat over a sleek black dress that hugged her hips and chest perfectly. She looked powerful. She looked dangerous. She barely recognized the confident, radiant woman staring back at her. Stefano sat in a velvet armchair nearby, sipping an espresso. His dark eyes tracked her every movement through the mirror, burning with a possessive intensity that made her skin flush. 2 heavily armed guards stood outside the frosted glass doors of the boutique, keeping the busy Chicago street at bay. "You look incredible," Stefano said softly, setting his cup down. "Crimson is your color." "Thank you," Julia said, turning to admire the cut of the fabric. "I never thought I could wear something so bold." "You were always bold, Julia. You were just standing in the shadow of a coward," Stefano replied. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the back of the boutique. The sound of a metal rack hitting the hardwood floor was followed by a frantic scuffle. One of the tailors screamed. Stefano was on his feet in a microsecond, his hand instinctively reaching beneath his tailored jacket, his entire demeanor shifting from an adoring lover to a lethal predator. From the rear hallway, dragging his feet and looking like a cornered rat, stumbled Brett Whitlock. He had slipped through the alleyway delivery entrance. The immaculate, arrogant wealth manager who had dumped Julia in the freezing rain just 2 weeks ago was completely gone. Brett's blonde hair was greasy and unkempt. His designer suit was wrinkled and stained with sweat. He looked frantic, his eyes darting around the room wildly until they locked onto Julia. "Julia!" Brett gasped, stumbling forward before freezing as he saw Stefano Sacco standing just a few feet away. Brett's face drained of all color. He looked from the Mafia boss to his ex-fiancée, completely failing to comprehend the scene. Julia was not cowering. She was not crying. She was standing tall, draped in wealth, radiating authority, with the most feared man in the city, acting as her shield. "Mr. Whitlock," Stefano said, his voice a chilling, deadpan whisper that seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. "You have exactly 10 seconds to explain how you bypassed my security, and another 5 to explain why I should not have my men drag you into the basement and peel your skin off in ribbons." Brett swallowed hard, his knees visibly shaking. "Sacco." "Mr. Sacco, please. It is a misunderstanding. The money, the codes, I can fix it. I just need to talk to Julia. She is my fiancée. She can fix the algorithms." Julia stepped off the pedestal. She did not hide behind Stefano. She walked forward, the heels of her new boots clicking sharply against the hardwood floor, until she stood just a few feet away from the trembling man who had broken her heart. "I am not your fiancé, Brett," Julia said, her voice steady and ice-cold. "You made that very clear." "Julia, please," Brett whined, tears pooling in his eyes. He reached out a hand, but quickly pulled it back as Stefano took a slow, menacing step forward. "They froze my accounts. My firm fired me. The cartel guys in the Caymans are looking for me. You have to unfreeze the trust. You owe me. I gave you 4 years of my life." "You owe me," Julia corrected him, her eyes blazing with newfound fury. "You owe me for your degree. You owe me for your job. You owe me for every single night I stayed up fixing your incompetent mistakes. You thought I was a liability because of my size. You thought I did not fit your aesthetic." She gestured to the luxury around her, and then to Stefan, who was watching her with fierce, burning pride. "Look at me now, Brett," Julia commanded. "I am the apex of the very empire you tried to steal from." Brett stared at her, the devastating reality finally crashing down on him. The quiet, submissive woman he had kept around as a tool was gone. In her place was a queen of the underworld, entirely out of his reach and holding his life in the palm of her hand. "I am sorry," Brett sobbed, falling to his knees. "Please, Julia, tell him to let me go. I will disappear." "You will never see me again." Julia looked down at him. She felt no pity. She felt absolutely nothing for the pathetic creature crying on the floor. "He is all yours, Stefano," Julia said smoothly, turning her back on Brett. Stefano smiled, a terrifying, shark-like grin. He snapped his fingers. The frosted glass doors of the boutique opened, and 4 massive enforcers marched inside. "Take Mr. Whitlock to the warehouse at the docks," Stefano instructed calmly, wrapping a protective arm around Julia's waist and pulling her flush against his side. He has $3.2 million worth of debt to work off. Ensure he understands the physical toll of manual labor. "No! Julia, wait! Please!" Brett screamed as the enforcers grabbed him by the arms, dragging him ruthlessly across the pristine floor. His screams faded as the heavy doors closed, leaving the boutique in absolute silence. Stefano turned Julia around to face him. He reached up, cupping her cheeks, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones. His chest heaved slightly, the adrenaline of the confrontation mixing with the overwhelming desire he felt for the woman in his arms. "You were magnificent," Stefano whispered. "I had a good teacher," Julia replied, her hands resting flat against the hard muscle of his chest. Stefano leaned down, capturing her lips in a deep, bruising kiss. It was a kiss of possession, of absolute devotion, sealing a pact between a ruthless king and the brilliant, beautiful queen who had saved his empire. Julia kissed him back with equal fire, knowing that she had finally found a man who craved her exact weight, a man who would burn the world down just to keep her warm. The Sacco Syndicate would rule Chicago for decades to come, and at the heart of the Shadow Empire sat Julia Conti, holding the keys to the kingdom. If you were captivated by Julia's rise to power and Stefano's dark, protective obsession, do not forget to tap that like button and share this story with your friends. Drop a comment below telling us your favorite moment between Julia and the Mafia boss. Do you want to hear more gripping, high-stakes romance stories like this one? Make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload.